Hi, my name's Tom Sarkovics. I played football at Bishop Gibbons High School. Graduated in '66. Went to Brockport after that, and after I graduated from Brockport, got my first job at Starpoint High School. I coached 34 years there, 80 different teams. I used to coach like 3 a year. And then became athletic director for the last 16 years, and I just retired this year after 50 years at Starpoint.
Wow. Talk about your Bishop Gibbons football experience.
When I started at Gibbons, I had played 1 year Little League football. And the reason that I ended up going to Gibbons, I went to Catholic schools. And from second grade on, I was at Ascension. And then Gibbons was just opening in around 62, so it was like, stay right in with the Catholic stuff. And so my dad, who played for NT, and my grandfather and uncle were huge supporters of NT. But he never pressured me one way or the other to, where we should go. In fact, he was a big supporter of the Catholic schools. So I guess it just happened that I was going to end up over there. And I started there. I played 1 year Little League then. So my freshman year, I went to, and I started at Gibbons. Really didn't know what I really wanted to do yet in football. I played baseball a lot, I played basketball, but baseball was my better sport. Went to Gibbons with the idea I was going to be an end and a punter, because that's what my dad did for NT. And the first year I was there, throwing the ball around, and they said, no, we're going to make you a quarterback. And I was a quarterback all the way through. My junior year, I was a JV quarterback as a sophomore, and then my junior year, Dave Chabelle was a real good athlete, was supposed to be the starter, played a couple of games, got hurt. So I came in and was the quarterback through the junior and senior year. We had fair teams, won a few games as our junior year, won a few more in my senior year, but we had some really good athletes. I think our biggest thing was depth. We had, as I recall, and I was looking back in yearbooks just to remind myself before this interview, and I think the family thing is what gave us our whatever depth we had. Both Pelosi brothers played. One was mayor of Tonawanda. He was a year ahead of me, but I played in my junior year. He was in the line, one of our centers and guards. His brother played. The Helinski brothers were in my class. They both went on and played in college. It was more like if you had a couple of, the McCarthys. Billy McCarthy was a real good athlete, my main target for 2 years, and his brother Tony was 2 years behind us, but he played on the varsity when I was a senior. So I always look back at if you had brothers or you had other, that was where we got our depth. If we would only had one, we would have had a lot less than that. Our line was really good. I'm going to say my junior year, Mike Cox, real good running back. Dale Wilson, real good running back. We still stay in touch with him. He's come back a few times. He was actually a Secret Service agent for the president back a number of years, but he worked right in the White House, so he had some pretty good stories for us. But we had kids that really did well. We were a close-knit group. I think our biggest thing, I know you've asked the question in the past about comparing us to NT. My thing with that is we had some decent athletes. Bob Akins, he was all Catholic in football and in track. He was our shot putter, strong kid. You can go back a couple of years when I was only a sophomore. Ed Harmon was a senior. He went on and played at Louisville, was a first or second team All-American, got drafted by the Cowboys, and then played for Cincinnati for a year or two. So we had some talented players. Our biggest thing was not having enough of them. But it was a great experience, I think. I think the interesting thing about us was we had basically the same coach all the time. Like Hank Lewis was our head of phys ed, and he was our head coach. Okay, so Hank we had my junior year, we had it's slipping my mind right now, but Paul Steinig was in my senior year. He was a JV, then he moved up and he was the Batt coach for us, Paul Steinig. We always said he was the toughest guy for workouts because he was a phys ed guy in NT, so he was always working us hard and stuff like that, and I think he had the NT attitude, which was toughing us up. So I had different coaches there, but Hank Lewis was the coach all the way through. I had him in football, had him in basketball, had him in baseball. So it was a little different than when you hear about the NT guys talking about Mr. Vetter or whoever else it was, or Mr. Coach Ramsey, who I knew real well. He took over when I first got out of there. But it was interesting to have the same guy for everything. You got pretty close with them and that. But again, it goes back to talent-wise. I think Fred Wiechek, I recall, was quarterback in an NT the same time I was at Gibbons. We had a little bit of a rivalry through even baseball. I remember pitching in an all-star game against Fred. And it goes back. It's funny because some articles you can go way back and find. Him and I pitched in an all-star game. I was in the National League at the time. He was in the American League, and we both pitched. It was in the Tonawanda News that it was the exact game. Same amount of hits were given up, same amount of runs. Ended up a 5-5 tie or something like that, and we both pitched had the same amount of strikeouts. So I knew a lot of the guys from NT because of that, playing in other sports and that. But getting back to the football part, I think that it would have been tough for us. We didn't have the depth of those guys. In my senior year, we had Rick Tomasini. We had Akins, I said, one of the Pelosi's. Bobby LaBarbera, who I think you interviewed before, was a running back. Didn't know he was going to be a relative in the future, but he was related to my wife, and now we became related. Billy McCarthy was my main man. We had our own little calls that if I thought a slant was open, that's what we would do, and I could call it out. So we did the beginning of audibles, but Hank and Paul Steinig ran the show, and then didn't have too much. The Pelosi brothers, when they were center, and if you remember the Pelosi, they were big guys, and we had a little call, a little pinch, and I would just go straight ahead because I could always get a couple of yards. They couldn't even get around them to get to me, So we had our little things in that, but I think about after I left and went on to be a phys ed major and health teacher and coach, I look back at the difference between now and then and being an athletic director. I was telling some people as I was thinking about coming here today, some of the stories of how different football was even back then. We threw a little more. I know NT was throwing by the time Fred was there, but we tried to open it up a little bit, and Hank let us do that. But I think, I know the last game, one of the last games we played Notre Dame Batavia, and if we would have won, we would have been tied for our division, and we lost like 25-13. But I know we lost it on, we called it the Lewis Special. It was he put it in, and my job was to roll out right, turn back, and throw it across to somebody who was leaking out there. And of course they intercepted it, and that was kind of the end of the game. Then they went down and scored and went up by 2 touchdowns. And we always think that we should never have done that coach's play, but you know, I should have thrown it probably. I don't even remember seeing the guy, to be honest with you, just let it go. The week before that game, and I just wanted to mention the difference in football and being an athletic director and how I had to run things. 2 weeks before that, because we had a week off in between that game, I got knocked out at Grand Island. And concussion, the whole deal. I got knocked out, came off the field, and I was also the punter. And Coach Lewis said, "What are you doing here?" Well, people have told me the story because I just came off the field. And he said, "No, it's 4th down, get in there." And so I went back in and punted the ball. I don't remember too much about it. And the game ended. And I talked with Billy the other day about it. Billy McCarthy and I are still real good friends. And I said, the next thing I remember was we used to take showers back there, which we don't do too much anymore, but we took showers, and I was in the locker room of Grand Island, and I could feel the water on my head, and I was looking down on my feet. And that's the first thing that I kind of realized what was going on. So the last maybe half an hour, I didn't know what was going on, you know? And I know my dad told me later, he introduced me to a friend of his that lived on Grand Island. I don't remember that. So we get on the bus, and I'm already not feeling good. And we're going down Payne Avenue. I lived on Shag Street, up near Division. And we got near my street, and I said, "I don't feel good." The guy says, "You want to get out?" I said, "Sure." So I got out of the bus now with a concussion, started to walk home. They just dropped me off because they were going back to Gibbons down Payne Avenue. And somebody who I still don't remember knew me and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm going home." And they picked me up and drove me home. I only walked maybe a block or so. And eventually went to the hospital, you know, and I was sitting at home with everything dizzy and whatever. And we ended up, the difference was Billy McCarthy also had a little head thing going. We got, between that game and the last game, they went and took us and got us new helmets, thinking that was going to make the difference, I guess. And we played that last game with, like, we were still using leather helmets. When they bought all the new equipment in 61 to 62 when they were opening the school, they still felt like those were the best helmets going. NT used them, so you know my dad was involved. They were all in the booster group and everything. And so we had gray helmets with a blue stripe down them, and we got rid of those by my senior year at the end of that time, and then after that they changed. But we had these like bubble white helmets, and you could see me and Billy because we were the only ones that had them, and we were playing probably when we shouldn't have. You know, I don't even. I know it's a football coach later on at Starpoint, and then as an athletic director, none of that would go anymore. You know, but that's how times were different.
You mentioned about your family, being involved in North Tonawanda football, and can you just tell us more about that?
Yeah, my dad played in, I think he played in that famous snow game, ice game, where they went in at halftime and changed his sneakers and beat Tonawanda in I think it was Humphreys was the coach. Vetter wasn't the head coach yet. And he became really good friends with Mr. Vetter and used to go over to his house and stuff like that. But the reason that the award stuff was named after, it was a Sarkovics Award, which was the first year they ever gave it, was in 1956. And Joe was in just before me and said, you know, he was the first winner. That I always remember that. They had the outstanding back, outstanding lineman that he named. But it's after Steve Sarkovics, who was my grandfather. He was a politician somewhat in town, worked at a couple different places, but he was the head of civil defense during the war times in NT, and he was real instrumental in the building, you know, the work corps, whatever they called it, in wartime, and they brought those guys in to build the concrete stadium that was over there at the original Vetter Stadium on Payne Avenue. And never missed a game. I think he missed one game. He had a minor stroke, and over a period of, I don't know, 30, 40 years, forget what the number was, never missed a game. Always sat in the front. You know, there he was with my uncle, Uncle Charlie, who was another one that you guys have recognized over the years. But yeah, so that was an interesting part of it, and I think my dad always felt that maybe there was a little pressure on that, you know. I don't know if that was his reason for sending me to, you know, telling me to go to Gibbons or not. But I think that that had a lot to do with it, you know. And it was a great opportunity for me anyway, because Gibbons was smaller. It was easy to play 3 sports, you know. You didn't have to be the stud of the whole school to be able to play 3. And we had a good basketball team, good baseball teams, you know, over the years. And so it was really, really good for me to be there. Like I said, it was a little different. You know, we played Sundays over at, our home games were at Vetter Stadium on Payne Avenue there, but.
On Sundays or Saturdays?
A lot of times Sundays too, Saturdays and Sundays, but we played some Sunday games. We would do, we'd have to go in and say some prayers before we went over there, you know, we'd go in and have a little thing, a little different than what when I got into public schools and stuff, but you know, I don't regret any of it. It was a great time in my life, and like I said, some of those guys, the McCarthy brothers, are still real good friends of mine that still do stuff with Billy and get my cars from Tony out at out in Orchard Park. So
we've been going in this conversation about more than 15 minutes now. What would you like to add that I haven't asked you? Probably that the camaraderie of Gibbons. We still do reunions every couple of years with the whole school. It was a different atmosphere than you would see after I was in public schools for 50 years. Obviously, a little bit different, but it was some really good players that I'm sure maybe could have found their way and played at NT, you know, and made that even better. But like I said, I don't regret any of it. I think it was a great time, and we've stayed really close. That's the other thing, which I know you guys do with NT with all their reunions and stuff, and I think that this Hall of Fame stuff that you do is fantastic. I started when we opened the new school, the new high school at Starpoint. It was the first year they asked me to be athletic director, and we didn't have a Hall of Fame. We started it that year, so it's been 16 years of Hall of Fame. It's one of the hardest things to do. I didn't mind doing it, and I like doing it, but I also know that there's a lot of good players who never get recognition, probably linemen, you know, I always say that, but that you couldn't play the game without those guys. And when you go back, I think it's a great thing that you continue to do this. It's nice to keep the memories going. We've tried to do that, you know, with Gibbons, but we get 10 years in there, and we've had to, you know, it ended. So we've done everything we could to keep it all together, you know, and so it was a great experience. But I think this NT stuff is awesome. I've been living in NT my whole life. I used to go to all the games on Fridays, you know, just like everybody else, and watch guys that I knew that I played baseball with and stuff like that. And I'm sure some of them came and watched us on the, you know, and then the next day or two later. So it was great, and I appreciate that you guys are, you know, keeping Gibbons involved in this, because we've had pretty good athletes there at different times.